Okay, so we're going to move on to Chapter 4. Chapter 3 was all about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Chapter 4 is about collective rights. Chapter 3 is also somewhat about individual rights. Okay. So what does collective refer to, just before we even begin? Refers to a, back, hand up, group of people. Okay, so we'll just get right into it. Okay. You don't need to take notes on all these slides. Okay. Some focus questions. I'll let you know more or less which slides you need to take notes on. What laws recognize the collective rights of First Nations peoples? What collective rights do official language groups have under the Charter? And what laws recognize the collective rights of the Métis? Okay, so we're particularly going to be focusing on Indigenous collective rights. Although there are 3 groups in Canada which have collective rights. Any guesses? We already talked about one, Indigenous peoples. What do you think the other 2 groups are? No. There's 2 other groups that have rights, collective rights in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Specified, let's say. No, Japanese definitely do not have collective rights in there. The French, the French, and the Anglophones. Francophones and Anglophones, okay. So this is a slide you'll need to take some notes on. So what are collective rights? They're rights held by groups in Canadian society. Okay. And only some groups have them, right? Charter of Rights and Freedoms generally applies to every person in Canada anyways. 3 groups have specific rights. They're also entrenched in the Constitution, which would mean that they're within the Constitution. They can't really be taken out. Okay. And they're different from individual rights and freedoms. Okay. This PowerPoint is going to be posted later, so don't feel like you need to copy every single word down. Okay. Stop doing that. Collective rights set Canada apart from other nations. For example, no groups have these kinds of rights in the United States. I don't know of any other country that really protects particular groups of people. I know that some countries might discriminate against particular groups of people. Country that I come from, unfortunately, does that. Okay. Collective rights reflect the idea of mutual respect among people. This idea has a long history in Canada. It shaped the Great Peace of Montreal in 1701 among 40 First Nations and the French. Okay. Probably don't need to write that last part there. Okay, we're going to move on. This next slide you do not need to take notes for, obviously, but as you can see, we have the big umbrella term, collective rights. The 3 green bubbles are the groups which are granted collective rights in Canada. So again, Anglophones, Francophones is people who speak English and French, and then Indigenous Aboriginal peoples. Within the Aboriginal groups, we have First Nations, we have Métis, we have Inuit. Okay. You're gonna have to take notes on this slide. So who holds collective rights? We just covered that. Again, you already have these notes, so don't feel like you need to write that part down there. Why do some people have collective rights? So collective rights recognize the founding peoples of Canada, because Canada would not exist today without these peoples. It comes from the roots of Aboriginal peoples, Francophones, and Anglophones in the land history of Canada. So you can just summarize that by saying, the 3 groups which have the most history in this land is the English, the French, and the Indigenous. And for those reasons, those groups have certain, let's say, additional rights protected for them within our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Okay, and we already looked at language rights and language education rights, minority language education rights that are, granted to, let's say Anglophones or Francophones, and then the Indigenous people have their own rights protected in various other documents. This is another slide. You're going to want to take some notes on this. Section 25 of the Charter recognizes the rights of Aboriginal peoples. Maybe just write that part. Okay, Section 25 of the Charter. It makes it clear that other rights in the charter must not interfere with the rights of Aboriginal peoples. Okay, so they protect the culture, regalia. Do you understand what this word means? Regalia, it's like clothing to some extent, right? But maybe more specific to culturally significant clothing, right? So a headdress would be known as regalia, right? Not necessarily just a shirt, but a headdress has particular specific meaning and function within Indigenous Aboriginal societies. Not everyone's allowed to wear a headdress, right? Or an eagle feather as well, right? Not everyone is allowed to just have one or touch one or use one, right? An example here, so where Aboriginal peoples are entitled to benefits under the treaties, other groups who do not have these benefits cannot argue that they have been denied the right to be treated equally. Okay, so everyone still gets equal treatment, but Indigenous groups, Francophones, Anglophones have, some specific rights there. Section 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982 gives constitutional protection to the Aboriginal and treaty rights of Aboriginal peoples in Canada. Some of these are the right to fish, log, hunt, the right to land, and the right to the enforcement of treaties. Obviously, this is very complicated in Canada because I showed a news article from like 2-3 years ago to some of my students in the past. There's a group of Indigenous people somewhere in the north, I think. Part of their culture, part of their tradition is they hunt whales, a particular whale, and that whale was endangered for a very long time. So the Indigenous group in the 1930s, they agreed, they said, all right, we will not hunt these animals to protect them for the long run, for future generations. 1970s to 90s, it came around, or early 2000s even perhaps, this whale is no longer endangered, and the Indigenous group wants to, exercise their traditional right, their treaty right, to be able to hunt this whale. And a lot of activists got upset. They said that it's barbaric. What purpose do you have hunting whales?
Many uses.
Many uses like
they would use the blubber, they could eat it.
Use the blubber, they definitely eat it. Okay. Additionally, how do you think, like in your mind, when you hear whale hunting, what do you think these people are up to? How do you think it looks?
Hunting whales.
They have like spears and stuff. And
Yeah, and that particular motion. So literally, these people are out in small boats, right? And they're throwing spears with their hands.
Yeah.
And how many whales do you think they're harvesting for their tribe?
Like one.
One.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a lot of food.
Yeah. And yet, grade 9s, people were still upset that they wanted to do this. Okay. Believe me, that does not sound easy at all. Okay. They're on very small boats.
How are you gonna get the whale in?
Exactly. How are you gonna get the whale with that big?
Well, they have methods, right?
Like 12 hours to break down a whale, and they have to cut everything up.
Mm-hmm. Right? And I say that just to specify, it's not like they're going out on a big metal vessel with like spear guns, and they're just like every whale in sight, bang, bang, bang. Okay, we got 4 whales. If we're gonna waste 3, we're gonna take the best one. No, they're hunting one whale. It involves many people, involves the entire tribe to some extent, right? And it's a very meticulous process, right? Okay. You would not catch me out there on a tiny boat trying to hunt a whale ever. Okay.
What about canoes? Kill a whale?
Give me a second, let me just check. I don't know if you need to take notes on the next set of slides. But numbered treaties are quite important. Actually, I think you do need to take notes on this slide. This is slide 7. Yeah, so just take some notes on this. No, I'll
I don't even know what it is.
according to, okay, that's excellent. So do we remember the Indian Act? Okay, we briefly talked about it. What came from the Indian Act is numbered treaties, right? So the Indian Act was kind of the umbrella and then they negotiated with specific groups throughout Canada, right? Now take a look, like BC, no negotiations. This, like eastern part of Canada, genocide, extinction, they just killed them, right? Okay, and they didn't bother, like particularly the maritime provinces, right? There's a particular group, the Beothuk. But, you know, they didn't make agreements there, right? They just took the land.
Wait, didn't they like cut their scalps off or something?
That was, I think, more in the US.
Scalping is like a pretty common thing that happened all over North America,
Oh.
right?
Ouch.
You know what scalping is, kids? They like cut across the forehead, they peel the skin back.
Ouch.
Pretty rough. I don't really know all the history of the East Coast, but that's where Canada was first formed. So, you know, groups there would have had potentially agreements with the British and French, like we already learned. Well, maybe that was in my grade 10 class, but the British and French had agreements with indigenous groups in those areas already because they recognized that the indigenous people had conflict with one another. British and French hate each other's guts. They teamed up, you know, so their history is a bit different than the rest of Canada, okay? But according to European history and practice, so a treaty is legally binding agreement outlining the rights and duties of the people signing. Okay, so that's a treaty. It's a legal document, and it outlines what the two parties, three parties, whoever it is, has to do. Okay. When there was such a thing as international law, then those negotiations, those treaties should be protected by them. Okay. And usually they're negotiated and agreed upon by two or more sovereign nations. Okay. Sovereign means that they govern themselves, right? People, it's not someone else speaking for them, right?